The blade stopped 3 inches from the child's throat. Queen Exathera of the Vorith Empire had witnessed executions before. She had ordered hundreds. Clean, efficient deaths carried out by warriors bred for precision. But she had never seen one halted mid-strike by a single outstretched hand. The human didn't grab the weapon. Didn't deflect it. 2 fingers rested against the flat of the curved blade, and Korath the Unyielding, champion of 17 death matches, executioner to the throne, stood frozen. His amber eyes wide. His breathing shallow. "Lower it," the human said. Koratha's mandibles clicked. The blade trembled. Then, slowly, impossibly, it descended. Exathera's primary hearts hammered against her chest plates. Around the throne room, her assembled court stood motionless. The child, a Vorith youngling accused of treason for speaking against the war, looked up at the human with confusion etched across her pale features. The human was unremarkable by Vorith standards. Shorter than her guards. No visible armor plating. No combat spines. The diplomatic envoy from Earth had arrived 6 cycles ago with credentials and a translator implant, speaking about trade routes and cultural exchange. She wore the same dull clothing as always, dark fabric that absorbed light, boots that made no sound on the crystal floors. "This tribunal," the human continued, her voice carrying despite its softness, "was called to pass judgment. Not to execute children." Exathera's claws extended involuntarily. No one spoke to her this way. No one interrupted a sanctioned death. The human had just committed an act that warranted immediate termination. Yet Korath still hadn't moved. "Your translation must be malfunctioning," Exathera said, keeping her tone level. "Step away from the accused. This does not concern Earth. It concerns me." The human's dark eyes met hers. No challenge in them. No fear either. Just steady, unblinking focus. "I was told the Vorith value strength. I was told you respect warriors above all else." "We do." "Then, show me a warrior brave enough to kill a child who only asked why her brother had to die in a war she doesn't understand." The silence that followed pressed against Exathera's skull like deep water. The child's crime had been clear. She had questioned the invasion of the Kelter system during a public gathering. Had called the war unjust. Had demanded answers from military officials. Such insubordination, especially from the young, could not stand. It weakened the Empire's resolve, planted seeds of doubt. But the human's words landed differently. They didn't accuse. They simply existed, heavy as neutron stars. "Korath," Exathera commanded. "Complete your duty." The executioner's muscles bunched. His blade rose again. The human's hand remained extended, waiting. And Korath stopped. "I cannot," he said, his voice like grinding stone. "This one, the human, she carries something." "She carries nothing," Exathera snapped. "She was scanned at entry. No weapons. No armor. No, not equipment." Koratha's gaze never left the human. "Presence. I have killed warriors twice my size. I have ended lives without hesitation for 20 seasons. But this one..." His voice faltered. "If I strike past her hand, I will die. I know this the way I know my own heart's beat." Madness. It had to be. Exathera rose from her throne, her ceremonial cloak billowing. She descended the 7 steps to the execution circle, fully aware that every noble, every guard, every advisor watched her approach. The human turned slightly, acknowledging her but maintaining position between Korath and the child. "You have committed an act of interference with Vorith justice," Exathera said. "Explain yourself, or you will join the accused." "I don't need to explain myself to you," the human replied. "But I will answer your question if you ask it properly." The audacity struck like physical force. Exathera's secondary heart skipped. Around them, she heard the whisper of weapons being drawn, saw her personal guard tense. "How," she said carefully, "does a diplomat from a species we have never fought, wielding no visible power, stop my finest warrior from completing his task?" The human smiled. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't cruel. It simply was. Because I grew up in a place where children learned to make decisions that would haunt them forever. Where 9-year-olds became soldiers because the alternative was watching their families starve. Where we sent teenagers to fight wars that politicians started and didn't know how to finish. She paused. I know exactly what this child is feeling. And I know exactly what it costs a society when it sacrifices its young to preserve its pride. You speak of your history, HFY said. I speak of humanity's shame. We did this. We're still doing it on some worlds. And every time we do, we lose something we can't get back. The human's hand hadn't moved from the blade. You can kill me. You can kill her. But you can't unknow what I just told you. You can't unfeel what Korath feels right now, staring at a child and wondering if this is who the Vorith Empire wants him to be. HFY looked at her champion. Korath's weapon remained raised, but his stance had changed. The certainty was gone. In its place, hesitation. Doubt. Weakness. Or perhaps something else entirely. The child began to cry. Soft, hitching sounds that filled the vast chamber. No one moved to comfort her. Protocol forbade it during sentencing. The human knelt, putting herself at eye level with the youngling. Still between the blade and its target. What's your name? She asked. The child's voice came out broken. Solace. Solace, the human repeated. That's a strong name. Do you know why you're here? I asked why. Mother said never ask why during war. But I wanted to know. Wanting to know isn't wrong. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do. The human glanced up at HFY. Your queen has a choice to make now. And so do you. HFY felt the weight of 8,000 years of empire tradition pressing down on her. Felt the eyes of her court measuring her strength. Felt the future of her rule balanced on this single moment. The human stood, finally, removing her fingers from Korath's blade. I'm not stopping you anymore, she said. The choice is yours, Your Majesty. Choose what kind of empire you want to be. The blade hung in the air, poised. Ready. Waiting for HFY's word. She looked at the child. At Korath. At the human who had somehow, impossibly, brought her throne room to a standstill. Then, Queen HFY of the Vorith Empire spoke the words that would reshape everything. Lower your weapon, Korath. The child is remanded to philosophical instruction. She will learn why we fight, and she will decide for herself if our cause is just. She turned to her court. If our empire cannot withstand the questions of our children, we do not deserve to stand at all. The human nodded once. A warrior's acknowledgement. And in that gesture, HFY finally understood what Korath had sensed. Not threat. Not power. Something far more dangerous. Absolute certainty born from having already paid every cost. The human had stopped the blade not with strength, but with the weight of every child she'd failed to save before. HFY wondered how many that was. She wondered if she wanted to know. The court remained silent as the human escorted Solace from the execution circle. Korath sheathed his blade with shaking hands. The queen returned to her throne, aware that she had just allowed an outsider to rewrite Vorith law through nothing but presence and perfectly chosen words. Outside the chamber, alarms began to sound. Reports flooded in of a Kelter fleet approaching the outer defense grid. The war Solace had questioned demanded attention. Decisions needed to be made. Lives hung in the balance. But HFY found herself thinking about the human's eyes when she spoke of children becoming soldiers. About the flatness in that gaze. The absence of anything except tired recognition. What kind of people, she wondered, produced diplomats who could face down executioners without flinching? What kind of wars had humanity fought that made stopping a blade seem ordinary? The human's quarters were modest. A sleeping platform, a workstation, personal effects from Earth arranged with careful precision. Solace sat on a cushioned chair, still trembling, while the human prepared something warm to drink. Why did you do that? The child asked. You could have died. Probably should have. the human said, not unkindly. But I've gotten good at not dying when I'm supposed to. Are all humans like you? The human laughed. It sounded worn. No. Most are better. Some are worse. I'm just someone who's seen this particular situation before and didn't want to watch it happen again. Solace wrapped her small hands around the warm cup. The Queen changed the law because of you. The Queen changed the law because you asked a question that deserved an answer. I just made sure you lived long enough to hear it. What happens now? The human sat down across from her. Now you learn. You study. You figure out if your empire's war is necessary or if it's just habit dressed up as honor. And when you're older, you'll make choices based on what you discovered today. What if I choose wrong? Then you'll carry it. Same as everyone else who's ever had to choose. The human's expression softened slightly. But asking the question means you're already trying to choose right. That's more than most people do. Outside, the alarms continued. Ships maneuvered into defensive positions. The Kelter fleet drew closer. Solace looked toward the window. Will there be fighting? Probably. Will people die? Yes. Is it worth it? The human didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice carried the weight of every battlefield she'd walked, every casualty report she'd filed, every promise she'd broken to people who believed her. I don't know, Solace. I've never known. But I keep asking the question anyway, because the day I stop asking is the day I become the thing I'm fighting against. The child nodded, processing this. Then, what's your name? Commander Sarah Chin. But you can call me Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. Don't thank me yet. You're about to get the most intense philosophical education the Vorith have ever inflicted on anyone. They're not going to make this easy. I don't want easy. I want to understand. Sarah smiled, genuine this time. You're going to be fine, kid. Better than fine. In the throne room, Exathera reviewed tactical displays with her war council. The Kelter fleet had positioned themselves at the system's edge, not attacking but not retreating. A statement. A challenge. An invitation to reconsider. They're waiting to see what we do. Her primary advisor said. If we show weakness, what this human did was not weakness. Exathera interrupted. It was something else entirely. She interfered with justice. She forced us to examine what justice means. The Queen's claws tapped against her armrest. Solace asked why her brother died. Can any of you answer that question in a way that would satisfy a child? Silence. Because, Exathera continued, if we cannot explain our wars to our children, perhaps we shouldn't be fighting them. Her military commander bristled. We fight for resources. For territory. For the Empire's expansion and security. And if our children question whether expansion requires the deaths of their siblings, what then? We teach them discipline. Obedience. Respect for, we teach them fear. Exathera said. Fear of asking questions. Fear of challenging authority. Fear of becoming like the human who stood in my court today, and didn't fear anything at all. The council shifted uncomfortably. Your Majesty. The advisor ventured. What exactly do you believe the human is? Exathera considered the question. She had read Earth's limited historical records available through diplomatic channels. Wars that spanned continents. Weapons that could sterilize planets. Conflicts that consumed entire generations and resolved nothing. And somehow, from that crucible, emerged people like Sarah Chin who could stop blades with nothing but presence and perfectly deployed truth. I believe, she said slowly, that she is what humans become when they survive enough wars to understand exactly what they cost. And I believe we should be very, very careful about making the same mistakes they did. You want to end the Kelter campaign. I want to pause it. Long enough to answer Solace's question properly. Long enough to determine if we're fighting because we must or because we've forgotten how to stop. The military commander's spines flared. The Empire will see this as capitulation. Let them. I saw something today that concerns me more than appearing weak. I saw my finest warrior unable to kill a child because a human made him remember what warriors are supposed to protect. Exathera leaned forward. What kind of empire trains executioners so well they forget the difference between justice and murder? No one answered. Bring me detailed reports on the Kelter conflict. Not tactical assessments. I want to know why we're there. What we gain. What we lose. And I want projections on what it costs our people to maintain this expansion. She paused. And I want to speak with Commander Chen again. Tomorrow. Privately. The council dispersed, leaving Exathera alone with her thoughts and the tactical display showing 2 fleets poised on the edge of violence. She wondered what Sarah would do in her position. What choices humans made when they stood where she stood now. Then, she realized she was asking the wrong question. The right question was, what would Solace think when she was old enough to understand that the Queen had a choice today, and made it based on wisdom from a species that had nearly destroyed themselves learning these lessons? Exathera hoped the child would approve. Hoped the Empire would survive the learning process. Hoped that stopping one execution might prevent 1,000 deaths down the line. But hope, she was learning, was a luxury warriors couldn't afford. Action was what mattered. Choice was what defined you. She opened a channel to the Kelter fleet. This is Queen Exathera of the Vorith Empire. I propose a cessation of hostilities pending diplomatic review of territorial disputes. We will withdraw our forward positions in exchange for guaranteed negotiation windows. Respond within 1 standard cycle. The channel closed. Her heart hammered. She had just offered terms to an enemy the Empire had been preparing to crush. Her guards exchanged glances but said nothing. Protocol demanded silence unless the Queen requested input. In her quarters, Sarah received a priority message on her diplomatic terminal. The Queen's private seal. An invitation to breakfast. A request for continued consultation on matters of imperial philosophy and the education of children who asked difficult questions. Sarah stared at the message for a long time. Then she looked at Solace, who had fallen asleep in the chair, exhausted from adrenaline and terror and relief. She thought about all the children she hadn't been able to save. The ones who became soldiers before they understood what soldiering meant. The ones who died asking why, never receiving answers. She thought about the blade stopping 3 inches from Solace's throat. About Karatha's certainty that striking past her hand meant death. About the weight she carried that translated into something the Vorith warrior recognized and feared. Presence, he'd called it. Sarah knew it by another name, survivor's guilt weaponized into protective fury. She had stopped the blade because she couldn't stop the ones that came before. Had intervened because she'd failed to intervene too many times in the past. Had stared down an executioner because every child's face reminded her of the ones she'd lost. The human military had sent her as a diplomat because her combat record made her unsuitable for active service. Too many citations for disobeying orders to protect civilians. Too many incidents of putting herself between soldiers and children. Too many times she'd chosen humanity over tactical advantage. They thought making her a diplomat would neutralize her tendency to interfere. Instead, it had given her a bigger stage. Sarah closed the message and pulled a blanket over Solace. The child murmured something in her sleep about wanting to understand. About needing to know why. You'll get your answers, kid, Sarah whispered. Even if I have to rewrite this entire empire's philosophy to make sure you do. Outside, the Kelter fleet received Exathera's message. Their response came swift, acceptance of terms, conditional on Vorith commitment to genuine negotiation rather than tactical delay. The war paused. Not ended. Not resolved. But paused. A breath. A moment to reconsider. In the throne room, Exathera felt something she hadn't experienced in her 30-year reign, uncertainty about whether strength meant fighting or knowing when to stop. The human had brought that uncertainty. Had infected her finest warrior with it. Had planted it in the Empire's consciousness by saving one child who asked one question. Exathera wondered how many empires Sarah Chin had dismantled this way. How many warriors she'd broken by making them confront what they'd become. Tomorrow, she would ask. Would sit across from this unremarkable human and try to understand how Earth had survived producing people like her. Tonight, she sent orders to her military: hold positions, prepare for negotiations, and start compiling data on every child who had lost family to the Kelter campaign. Because if she couldn't answer Solace's question, she didn't deserve the title of queen. Sarah stood at the window of her quarters, watching Vorith warships maneuver into defensive formations. Behind her, Solace slept peacefully, unaware that her near execution had triggered a cascade of consequences that might reshape an empire. The human touched her fingers to the glass, remembering the feel of Koratha's blade. The certainty that if he'd pushed past her hand, she would have broken every bone in his body before he could complete the strike. The cold mathematics of violence that still lived in her muscles despite years of diplomatic training. She was what humanity made when it sent children to war, and some of them survived long enough to become something other than soldiers. She was proof that asking why mattered more than knowing how. She was the ghost of every failed intervention, every child she couldn't save, given one more chance to get it right. And tomorrow, she would teach a queen what it meant to rule with wisdom instead of tradition, even if it meant tearing down everything the Vorith Empire thought it understood about strength. The blade had stopped 3 inches from Solace's throat. But the real weapon Sarah had deployed was simpler and far more dangerous. She had made them question whether the killing was necessary at all. Empires could survive defeats. They could rebuild after losses. But they couldn't survive the moment their people started asking why they fought in the first place, and found the answers inadequate. Sarah smiled in the darkness. Not with satisfaction. With grim recognition. Humanity's greatest export wasn't technology or culture or resources. It was the hard-earned wisdom of a species that had nearly destroyed itself, and barely learned better. She just hoped the Vorith were faster learners than humans had been. Hoped they wouldn't need centuries of bloodshed to understand what one child's question had illuminated. Hoped that stopping one blade today meant thousands wouldn't need to fall tomorrow. But hope, as always, was just the starting point. The real work began when the Queen asked her questions and Sarah had to decide how much truth to reveal about what humanity had been, what it had done, and what it had paid to become something better. The night deepened. The fleets held position. And in the silence between heartbeats, the future of the Vorith Empire hung suspended, waiting for morning and the conversation that would define everything that came after .2/2.